All right, welcome back to, I should say, the Virtually Speaking podcast, but at this point, I think I'm outnumbered. So welcome to the Unexplored Territory podcast.
We are taking over.
Well,
Gentlemen,
Pete.
how you doing, guys?
Good. How are you?
All right, so for those listening, we got here Frank Denneman and Duncan Epping. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks.
Yeah, man. So a couple things. We're here at VMware Explore, and I love chatting with you guys because you've been in the industry for a while. You guys are visionaries. You know, you've been around. You've been around the block. You guys have both written amazing books that most people in this industry have used to actually get promotions, to actually learn this business. So you guys definitely know what you're saying. And so I want to start off just by saying, what are some of your takeaways from this year's VMware Explore, Frank?
What I loved was the stat on the keynote that says we're running 85 million workloads. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, that is mind-blowing, isn't it?
And it's not test workload. It's not, let me just deploy something and test it and see where it goes. No, it's operational critical, it's revenue critical workloads. That's my key takeaway.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Duncan, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it's the amount of innovation happening. I mean, I've seen a whole bunch of sessions this week, and of course, the keynote and all of the new stuff that is being talked about, whether it's VMware Aria, vSphere 8, vSAN 8, some of the things that Chris Wolf was talking about, some of the things that Kit Colbert was talking about in his solution keynote. It's just there's so many different things happening. Even for us, it's impossible to try to track everything and keep up with it.
Oh, yeah.
You have to, when you have a podcast, you try to figure out what's happening so you can invite guests, but it's so difficult. It's so difficult, and it goes at insane speed.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, obviously, we've been behind the scenes for a while looking at some of these products. So, when it comes to vSAN 8 and to vSphere 8, we have a pretty good idea and excited to see some of this stuff finally announced, like the Express Storage Architecture for vSAN and just all the offerings. Even the vSphere Plus stuff is really exciting. But then, like you said, there's so many announcements, It's overwhelming. I find myself walking over to the booths just like a customer and being like, please tell me about this. I literally was recording some of our own employees for the podcast because there's so much to learn here.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I actually sat in some of those sessions. Like I did the deep dive on vSAN, ESA, with Wang Wang and Pete Kuller. And it's the reason I sat in, because I wanted to learn myself as well. Of course, I've already heard Pete speaking about it. I've seen the slide deck, I've installed it and configured it, but there's always something there that you can pick up. So, it's just ridiculous, the amount of new things happening, specifically in this case for vSAN.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know you guys already did a podcast recently on Unexplored Territory with, you did one on Area, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Although back then it wasn't called Area, so we recently renamed the
Oh, did you rename the episode?
Yeah, because we couldn't release with the name because the name wasn't out yet. But yeah, that was with Jet, and Jet.
Oh, Jet Elzine. Yeah. Oh, he's great.
He's great, and he spoke about what Area does, and specifically in this particular case, we were talking about Area Hub, which basically allows you to manage and monitor multi-cloud entities. So there could be virtual machines, containers, etc., etc. It just gives you an insane insight in terms of what's happening in your environment. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah. Lots of discussion around GPU this week, Frank.
Yeah. So we released some new interesting technology together with NVIDIA.
Yeah.
And so the work that we did together with NVIDIA propels us into a new area of acceleration. And so one of the great things, except from the DPU, the SmartNIC technology, is that we now are able to see the underlying technology that connects particular GPUs. So we can actually see that some GPUs are interconnected with each other. And so we can now provide a smart way of connecting multiple GPUs to accelerate distributed training for machine learning. So what data scientists really need to have these monster machines with multiple GPUs to train large models, we can offer that in a very elegant way, like easy to deploy, easy to create, without having the VI admin or the ML ops team guess which GPU is connected to which GPU with a separate interlink, because we bubble it up together with the driver of NVIDIA. So we work together with NVIDIA to make this happen.
Yeah.
That shows the partnership.
It's an interesting concept. Certainly not a new one, right? From a VMware perspective, having you start with a physical hardware device, like maybe a server, or in this case a GPU, and you abstract that physical device, and you can team it up with other resources, and then provide a logical experience that actually has way more power than just one physical device.
Yeah, and this is the beauty of VMware. Still, without losing the level of abstraction, still provide a level of intelligence that shows that the underlying infrastructure architecture still matters. Knowing which is the fastest route, knowing which provides you the biggest advantage.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that we give you in an easy way to consume.
Where does that come from? That logic to determine which one to use? Is that from NVIDIA, or
that's the driver of NVIDIA that shows the architecture that is connected. So we do that with a GPU to GPU connection with NVLink, or we can do that with a GPU to a Mellanox NIC. So that is the NVIDIA connection once again.
Okay. Yeah. Duncan, I'll tell you what, for the benefit of the audience, why don't we talk a little bit about the Express architecture from vSAN?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think it's fantastic what they did. I know the team has been working on it for a long time.
Yeah.
And I've been talking to that team probably for the last 2-3 years just about that architecture and what they were planning. And when they originally said that, it was going to be released in 2022, we all laughed because we figured it's not going to be possible, right?
Yeah.
And still, although it hasn't been officially released yet, we just announced it, which means that it will be out at some point in time in the near future. And if you look at the architecture, what we did is we basically just, we changed the whole model. If you look at the original version of vSAN, OG as I like to call it, I know, the marketing team calls it OSA, I like to call it OG. But if you look at that version of vSAN, it's all about creating disk groups, having this caching layer, having this capacity tier. And then when you deploy a virtual machine, of course, the caching layer provides you that, performance aspect, and the capacity tier is for storing the data, essentially. With this new version, with the Express architecture, we actually changed that completely. It's based on a single tier model at this point in time, but we're also ready for other types of architectures in the future. So it's a future-proof solution. And with this single tier architecture, at this point in time, what we actually end up doing is not having a specific device anymore for caching and having specific devices for capacity. All of the devices in your host are contributing to both. So it's a completely different model. And then on top of that, what he also did, and I think this is extremely smart, is they looked at all of the different aspects of storing the data. So whether you compress data, whether you encrypt data, whether you do RAID 5, whether you do RAID 6, whether you do RAID 1. They looked at all of those different mechanisms, and they started introducing changes to those mechanisms to ensure that the platform is optimized for workloads as well.
Yeah.
So just to give an example, like when we normally do encryption or when we normally do compression in the original version of vSAN, we actually do that at the lowest layer, which means that data is first sent over the wire, and then it's compressed and stored on disk.
Right.
In this particular case, we actually compress it at the top. If we need to encrypt it, we can encrypt it as well. We do the checksumming, and then we send the data over the wire, which means that we send less data over the wire.
Exactly.
On top of that, when it actually arrives at the host, the individual hosts don't need to compress it anymore. So instead of having like 4 or 5 hosts doing the compression, now it has happened at a single host. So you actually reduce the amount of effort needed from a CPU perspective to do the exact same task in the past. So I think that is something which is fantastic. It solves a lot of problems for customers, and it frees up a lot of resources in the end.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes sense now to do this, right? The Express storage architecture can take advantage of way faster drives that are a lot less expensive, and just technology in general has changed so much. I mean, I understand previous version, you have to have multiple disk groups, and why do you have to have 2 tiers? Well, because not every disk is created equal. You may have some stuff that's cheaper that you don't want to actually be caching, and it might be capacity. So I believe that the vSAN architecture was very intelligent for the hardware that was available in that day. But that's no longer the case anymore. So it made perfect sense that they decided to re-architect this and keep it current with this new current architecture. But at the same time, offer the ability to, because it's only an option, the ability to use the OG, or the original storage architecture for those that are not ready for that.
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out as well here is that when you start looking into vSAN 8.0 and vSphere 8.0, when you actually configure it, you have the option to either go the original version or the new version, right? It's an option. Whether you want to use the original version, you still should be looking at 8.0 itself, because it provides additional capabilities as well. For instance, the caching disk in 8.0, that has been extended from 600 gigs from a logical partition perspective to 1.6 terabyte. So you can cache more data on top of that platform as well. So I think it's very beneficial to even look at 8.0 if you're not planning on using that particular capability from a ESA perspective.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I've got one more topic I want to talk to you guys about, and that is podcasting. How are you guys enjoying being podcasters?
Oh man, it's extremely painful. You know what it's like.
The hours of preparation is insane.
Really?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, right? So you try to invite guests that have produced various products and services. So you have to prepare really well in order to come up with really good questions. And typically that's not your main area of focus. So you have to read and discuss what you want to ask, what is interesting for the audience with each other. So we typically spend hours and hours of reading and discussing about what do we want to present to our listeners.
Yeah.
And so you learn from it quite a lot, and it's really interesting, but it takes a long time per episode.
Yeah, right? I think the best example was we did an episode on Carbon Black.
Yeah.
We had never seen Carbon Black. We had never used Carbon Black, so we actually spent 2-3 hours just watching YouTube videos, trying to figure out what it is, so we can ask intelligent questions. And I think in the end it's a really interesting episode. So that works very well. I think that model.
Yeah. Honestly, you nailed it right there. I mean, that is the art of a good podcast, in my opinion, is somebody who's curious, somebody who wants to learn. But at the same time, there needs to be a little bit of research in order to be able to ask intelligent questions.
Exactly.
You don't need to solution the entire thing. You just need to know what are the right questions that can actually produce a more interesting and productive conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with an educational podcast, right? It's not the Joe Rogan experience. I'm not just having a conversation about random stuff. We're actually talking about something very specific. So you need to have a list of all of the different things that you want to ask, not just to ensure that it's great for the listeners, but also for our guests, because they also spend a significant amount of time, to take the time out of the day to actually join you for one of these episodes. So I think that's also extremely important.
Very good, very good. Well, yeah, I'm definitely a fan. I'm looking forward to my Unexplored Territory t-shirt.
We have it with us.
Oh, sweet. Very good, very good. Frank, Duncan, thank you so much for joining Virtually Speaking, and enjoy the rest of your VMware Explore.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks.